Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the Democrat debate Doozies. Dr. Robert Lawson, co-author of the book Socialism Sucks, joins me in the studio. The Coup via Impeachment update, and LeBron's dangerous ignorance. And I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
I am America. One voice, united we stand.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And welcome again to America Can We Talk? I'm Debbie Georgatos. In today's First Five, I just want to tell you a few doozies from last night's Democrat presidential debate. To be perfectly honest, I didn't watch it. I just watched little highlights today. But I want to start by saying that this debate is occurring in a context where America's economy is about as strong as it has been in decades. We have fabulously low unemployment rates. We have renewed trade deals that are preferable, or at least favorable and fair to America. We have a president beginning the steps of securing our border, so we're going to have a stable workforce based on people who have a legal right to be here. Economic numbers in all sorts of ways are great. And so the Democrats are trying to paint this as a horrible time in America, a horrible time for families who should be outraged and jump into all of their big government economic controls that they have in mind. So against that backdrop, I'm going to play just a few quick clips from last night. This one, there is one that is the winner I'm going to save until the end. But I first want to play Tom Steyer, who is a billionaire, B as in boy billionaire, had this little clip to say about the income gap being unfair, what he would do about it. So if we have Tom Steyer ready to roll.
Senator Sanders is right. There have been 40 years where corporations have bought this government, and those 40 years have meant a 40-year attack on the rights of working people and specifically on organized labor. And the results are as shameful as Senator Sanders says, both in terms of assets and in terms of income. It's absolutely wrong. It's absolutely undemocratic and unfair. I was one of the first people on this stage to propose a wealth tax. I would undo every Republican tax cut for rich people and major corporations.
So that was Mr. Tom Steyer, the B billionaire. He's also one of the extreme environmentalist guys way down the path with the New Deal. The other clip I wanted to play to start off our discussion today was from Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, many of the kind of commentators after the debate said that pretty much Elizabeth Warren is viewed to have won. She is apparently the first, she's polling the highest right now, and that Bernie Sanders was actually second. So Bernie and Warren in a debate about who's going to become the presidential candidate. I think Biden's going to get forced out, in my opinion. But in any case, I want to have, if you could, Matt, the very wonderful producer, play a clip with Bernie Sanders and his views on income inequality.
When you have 500,000 Americans sleeping out on the street today, when you have 87 million people uninsured or underinsured, when you got hundreds of thousands of kids who cannot afford to go to college and millions struggling with the oppressive burden of student debt, and then you also have 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society, that is a moral and economic outrage. And the truth is, we cannot afford to continue this level of income and wealth inequality, and we cannot afford a billionaire class whose greed and corruption has been at war with the working families of this country for 45 years. So if you're asking me, do I think we should demand that the wealthy start paying the wealthiest, top 0.1%, start paying their fair share of taxes so we can create a nation and a government that works for all of us? Yes, that's exactly what I believe.
I meant to tell you, the question posed to him was, you know, Senator Sanders, you previously said you think that there should be no billionaires in America. Do you really believe that? Is your tax system designed essentially to eliminate all billionaires? That's the question he was answering. Well, it's a really interesting thing because these two questions that we just played, the answers played by the candidates, ties into the guest we have joining us today in studio, the co-author of Socialism Sucks, because I really want to talk about the popularity of socialism among millennials and trending today among Americans overall, and how valid or invalid are these concerns that the Democrats are posing, essentially arguing that the income inequality, wealth taxes. In fact, I meant to mention both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are proposing massive wealth taxes. And to be clear what that means, it's not a high income tax rate. It is about the idea if you have your overall family wealth is above some level, it's basically if you have more than this much money, send it in. They have different formulas about it and different ideas about it. But the basic premise is you should be able to tax wealth. So, my friends, in an economy flying high, unemployment low, more and more people confident that they're going to find a job when they finish college, their kids are going to find a job when they finish college, that we have a country where jobs are coming back here. Among the main messages out of the out-of-tune American Democrat Party is somehow America's grotesquely unfair. And I told you I was saving the best clip for last. I can't resist playing this, though. This is Cory Booker asked about impeachment. Please, if you can just play Matt the Wonderful, Cory Booker's answer on impeachment.
You have said that President Trump's, quote, moral vandalism disqualifies him from being president. Can you be fair in an impeachment trial? Please respond.
So, first of all, we must be fair. We are talking about ongoing proceedings to remove a sitting president for office. This has got to be about patriotism and not partisanship. Look, I share the same sense of urgency of everybody on this stage. I understand the outrage that we all feel, but we have to conduct this process in a way that is honorable, that brings our country together, doesn't rip us apart.
Okay, here's my last point in today's first five. That is an insane answer. Insane. He's saying we're going to conduct impeachment in a way that brings the country together when Donald Trump voters are above 90% still in support of him. There's only two explanations. Either he gives an answer like that because he's trying to persuade the American people that plant the seed, everybody's on board, impeachment's going to happen, let's get rid of him, or he lives in a Democrat bubble in Washington and he actually has no idea that millions of Americans are outraged at the idea of impeaching this president over zip, zero, nada, nothing. A story we'll get back to later today. But that, my friends, is today's first five. So we're going to turn, and I mentioned at the start of the show, we have a guest in studio. I want to show you his book. The book is right here. It looks just like this. It's called Socialism Sucks. Two economists drink their way through the unfree world. In studio joining us, we have one of the two co-authors, Dr. Robert Lawson. He is the director of the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom at the Cox School of Business, SMU. Bob, welcome.
Hi, Debbie. Good to be here.
Glad you are here. So, well, that was a fun intro as I was getting ready for the show today. So let me start with, is it let me just say, you're a free market capitalist kind of guy?
I am. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I have the Full and Wider Chair in Economic Freedom. That's my title.
Say it again.
Full and Wider Chair in Economic Freedom is my actual job title.
Love that. Well, we're going to hit a lot of points in your book. I want to start with, what is your sense of the impact on the economy of a wealth tax? Does that make things fairer for poor people?
Well, when I heard both of the first two clips, the thing I heard the saying was they're getting rich at our expense. I mean, both those politicians who have already forgotten their names. I'm trying to forget politicians' names.
I won't tell you.
They have this idea that the rich are getting richer, and that's true. The rich are getting richer. You can see it in the data. The top 10%, however you measure it, they're getting richer. The poor is not getting poorer. That's a myth. But the underlying idea that they have is that they're getting richer at someone else's expense, and I just don't see that. We live in a market economy, and for the most part, the Walton family, the evil Koch brothers, the Bezos, all these names that we all know, household names, these billionaires, multi-billionaires, they got rich by providing you and me with stuff that we like.
They deliver books to my house in less than a day now.
Yep.
I get cheap energy in my home to keep me warm in the winter and cool in the summer. These people are enriching our lives, and they're actually skimming just a tiny fraction of the value they're creating for us. So that's the fundamental sort of myth that these politicians are peddling, is this idea that they're getting rich. They are getting rich, but the idea that they're getting rich at our expense, that's the problem, and that's just not true.
I love your point, too, and you make it in the book, too, about all the things that these rich and evil individuals and corporations actually provide. So when you go to the grocery store, there are 17 different choices of kinds of apples, if that's what you want, if you're into, or shoes, clothing, house building materials. They make life better. They make the American standard of living higher and better. So punishing them doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Indeed. When you go to the store, you see, one of the things about socialist countries is you see nothing in the stores. But if you do see something in the stores, you'll see like one kind of thing or two kinds of things. That's the greatest difference between socialism and capitalism for a man on the street, just sort of walking everyday life, is the utter lack of variety in your daily existence, which we have this amazing world we live in.
And we take it for granted. I do want to get to the book and then the millennials in our country, but in the book part of it, you and your buddy, as you say, as the subtitle says, you drank your way through the world, but you and your buddy traveled to a variety of countries. We're going to talk about all of them, essentially assessing their economic system and the well-being of their culture and their society. So, first of all, who's that? Is this your idea, this drink your way to all the countries?
I think Ben's a professor at Texas Tech, guns up, I think they say. He texted me, I think he was drunk on an airplane. He says, hey, Bob, let's do a book about something we both love, which is traveling and drinking, frankly. So it was kind of I wanted to go to Cuba, too, and just because I wanted to go see what it was like, see the kind of crazy for my own self. And I figured if we write a book, we could write it off our taxes. So that was kind of the
It's a very good point. Okay, actually, one thing I want to mention before we get into the book is this. So you are at SMU, and you also are part of publishing. You do publish this Index of Economic Liberty, and I meant to write the exact name, Economic Freedom Index. You work on that every year, right?
Yeah, I'm the co-author of the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Index. It's an economic freedom index. It comes out every year. Gets some notoriety in the press, but it's a big scholarly project. We get thousands of citations from other scholars. It's we just put a number on how free you are economically. So Hong Kong is the freest economy. Venezuela is last.
So you rank countries in the world, and you rank them on economic freedom. So we are going to get to the book, I swear, but I love the idea you do this. In fact, you know what? I have a copy of this at home, and today I was going to find it and bring it. It's not this year's; it was several years ago, but it's the coolest thing. So much information. But so, how do you rank countries? How do you convey to people which country has the most economic freedom?
It's horribly dull. We gather data. I mean, we just go to the IMF and the World Bank. We get data on tax rates, tariff rates, inflation rates. We gather some data on like the security of property rights, how fair the judges are in settling disputes. How many days does it take to move a container into the port? How long does the customs duties and process take?
So the flow of the economy.
Yeah. So it's basically how free are people to buy and sell and exchange, hire workers, fire workers, import, export, invest, start a business. It's different data that we've got for large numbers of countries now. Data that we just sort of collect all these raw numbers. I use algebra,
Yep.
and we turn these into index numbers. We average the numbers, and you get an index for the countries of the world.
So how many countries are in it?
162. Right
162.
now. Yeah.
Dare I ask where America is?
We're back up to fifth. We usually were third. It was Hong Kong and Singapore and the United States. And then starting in 2000, the U.S. began to slide down in ranking and rating. It went down to as low as 16th, and it's come back up a little bit in the last few years, although our data are still 2 years old. So we just released the 2017 numbers
For this year's?
For this year's report.
Okay. Part of what you assess, I would guess, is government regulation of business. Is that right?
Yeah, government spending's up and government regulation are up. Those are the two big areas where the U.S. ratings were taking a little bit of a hit. And some of that's gotten better in the last, 4 years, let's say.
So if someone wanted to find this, I am distracted from your book by this idea of touting this economic freedom index, because I do think people have vague ideas or general ideas, but the concept of an economist, or not just you, but others too, actually gathering data and telling the world how things are ranked is really inviting and factual. So if someone wanted to read it, where do they go to get that?
Freetheworld.com. That's the shortest way to find it. Freetheworld.com, or just Economic Freedom of the World. Yeah.
Okay. So I love that you published that. It's really, really great. So this book, Socialism Sucks, I have some stickies here. I wanted to ask you certain things about it. But to start with, you talked about in here what socialism is. And I was going to say, that term gets bandied about a lot. And in fact, you'll see people just talking about some policy online they don't like, oh, the government, regulated this or changed this tax rate. That's socialist. So how do you define socialism in the way as you're talking about this in this book?
I define it the way Karl Marx defined it. It means the state is going to control the means of production. That is to say, the land, the labor, the capital, the things that we have, the people, the labor, the capital. This stuff is that we're going to have. It's going to be controlled by a central body, a central plan, which means the state. So state control of the means of production is what socialism means. It's what it's always meant. Maybe until fairly recently, where the word is now starting to evolve a little bit, but in a way that I think is actually adding a lot of confusion.
You do. I was going to argue for embellishing the term, but anyway, I'll tell you that in a moment. So you only listed 3 countries you view as socialist right now. It was North Korea, I'm not looking at my notes trying to remember them, Cuba, North Korea, and Venezuela.
Yeah.
Okay, so how could China not be socialist?
Well, so what's happened in China, the title for the chapter on China is called Fake Socialism. And it still has some elements of socialism. The United States has elements of socialism, if you think about it. But what they don't have anymore is a central plan. They allow private enterprise. They allow private companies. They have a lot of state-run companies. But for the most part, those state-run companies are selling their products on markets with unregulated prices. They compete
in China, you're talking about. Wow.
And they're competing with private companies as well. And the key thing is there's no central plan. There's no group of economists in bad suits sitting in Beijing deciding, how many ball bearings the economy makes, how many trucks the economy makes, how many tractors. They gave that up 25 years ago. And to me, that's the lack of a central plan. Even though there's still a lot of government involvement in the economy, that lack of a central plan moves you out of the socialism box and puts you into I'm not going to call it a free market economy, but it puts you in the sort of a not socialist box.
So somehow kind of socialist free market meld.
Yeah. And the reality is that's what the index does too. The reality is all countries are a meld, even our own. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I will say I use this expression on this show, and I should have asked you this ahead of time, but I use the expression that communism, pure communism, is just kind of socialism with no way out. I mean, socialism is the economic system in which communism operates. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I suppose. The word communism has different meanings too.
Yeah.
Karl Marx actually meant it in a completely different way than we would call it. Like the Communist Party took that word communist from Karl Marx. And communism to Karl Marx was some sort of future utopic land of milk and honey where we're all going to just break bread together and love each other or something. And
everyone has everything they
But
need.
that was going to come after socialism, according to Marx. So we never got to the communism part, according to the Marxist theory. But today, when you say communism, what you usually mean is a hard socialist country that's combined with a totalitarian sort of dictatorship.
Yeah. Well, the idea in communist countries today, in part, is that no other political party is permitted.
Right.
So you really can't get outside of their control.
But one of the things we talk about in the book, and one of the things that Friedrich Hayek talked about and Milton Friedman talked about, 2 great economist heroes of mine, is how hard it is to try to combine total control of the economy without also running people's lives and their democracies
exactly.
and freedom of speech and things like that.
I think that is why the term socialism continues to be broadened, or people's use of it. People see in America, they see the government, especially in the previous administration and other ones, the growing power of the centralized federal government controlling more of industry, and they're loosely saying, even though the government doesn't own the industry, through regulation, they're strangling it or they're extremely controlling it. And I think it is a good idea. I'm pretty much of a purist in language. I like actual meanings of words. And so you're right about what socialism means. But there's something about the mindset of the growing power over the federal government, over our economy, that's trending towards socialism. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree. Yeah, we're definitely moving towards socialism, towards the road to serfdom, to use Friedrich Hayek's term. So yeah, and that's what, again, the index kind of is a scale, like how far down that socialism trail are you? And there's no real bright line where you go from not socialist to socialist, but the word has to have some meaning. And so we wanted to define it in a way that was the classical way, which was still state control and central planning. That doesn't mean that I'm happy with the like Swedens of the world, which are not socialist countries.
That was my next topic. Go ahead.
So that's the title of the chapter, Not Socialism, Sweden.
Yep.
There's no central plan in Sweden. The people live in private homes, private landlords. Prices are unregulated. Volvo's a private company. It's a market economy. Now, their taxes are really high, and we found that out when we were drinking beer, because the beer is really expensive. It's very good. And actually, that's a tell. If it's good beer, you're not in a socialist country, because socialist countries' beer is terrible. But the beer was good in Sweden.
I can know that.
But it was really, really expensive. So what you've
Yeah.
got there is a market economy with taxes that are 50% higher than what we're used to here in the States.
Okay, so Sweden, I wanted to mention in part because it's Bernie Sanders' favorite country.
Yeah.
Probably even more than the United States. He's just always touting Sweden. So, and he calls it socialist. But you kind of said it. But why is Sanders inaccurate to call Sweden socialist?
Well, I got two things about. Well, one, the Swedes themselves don't like to be called socialist because again, it's private companies. Volvo's private.
Yep.
Swedish firms are making products, and there's no Swedish economists deciding how many cars Volvo makes or what color they paint them, or they're not assigning workers to jobs. There's no central plan. Now, when you make a product and sell it and earn a profit, they're going to tax a good portion of that profit. But they're not making those production and economic decisions for the firms
Okay.
and for the workers like you would in a socialist economy. Now, I think Bernie is frankly a liar. Bernie knows what socialism is. He went to the Soviet Union for his honeymoon, which is frankly
Okay.
insane.
Weird, yes.
And he came home and he liked it. He talked about how good it was. So for him today, 25, 30 years later, to say, well, socialism really means Sweden, when he actually went to socialist countries and saw it up close and personal and liked what he saw, for him today to sort of change his tune, I think he's just being a typical politician, frankly, and he's lying to us. I think when Bernie says socialism, he understands what it means. He means it meant Russian-style socialism, and I think he's baiting and switching us, to be perfectly honest.
I think that rings true. I mentioned before we started the show that in high school, I got to go to Russia while it was still communist. And one thing I noticed there, and I wonder if you notice this in your assessment of countries as they have more and more degrees of socialism, the whole country, Moscow as an example, under communism, it just was gray. The people's clothing was gray. The stores were dank. The appearance of the items for sale. And it's kind of like, I want to get to this kind of in a moment of this kind of mental impact of socialism, but the mere power of the government to control the economy dulls down what is produced. Do you agree with that?
I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, to take an example from Cuba. We went to Cuba. It's a functioning socialist economy in the sense that they aren't starving to death.
Yep.
And they're doing okay. But when you go into a store, there's two kinds of beer, Bucanero and Cristal. And tomorrow there'll be two types of beer, and the day after that, it's the same two types. Your whole life, you'll go through your whole life, and they're only going to have two types of beer. They don't import any beers. They don't allow imports. And the central planners decided to only make two. There's a certain dreariness or certain sameness,
Yes.
a sameness to that life. We were only there a week. And frankly, we were desperate for variety
For another beer,
in food,
different-
and not just beer, but in food.
Yep.
There's no salt. I mean,
Yes.
bring your own salt if you go to Cuba. It's my advice as a tourist. I mean, it is a dreary, bland existence. Now, the Cubans themselves are a lively folk, and their music's famous, and hanging out with Cubans is great fun. And so they make the best with what they have. But it is, compared to the sort of liveliness of a market economy, it's really quite shabby and dreary.
So in Cuba, you say the government it really is a centrally planned economy. So if a private citizen wanted to say, you know what, I could make a better beer. I know a better formula. I want my own beer company. You're just not allowed to do that.
No, you would never be allowed to do that. Now, they do allow some limited private enterprise in two areas. Housing, they allow some private homes to be rented out. People can rent out their flats or a back room. They're called casas particulares. And then there's also private restaurants now. They're hard to find because they don't have big advertising signs. It just looks like a bombed out building, and you walk in and there's a really nice restaurant in there. And that's those two parts of the economy, which are tourist driven.
Yeah.
They actually work great. I mean, we had some pretty good meals. Again, it's a little bland. The food supply is pretty much controlled by the government, but the casas particulares were quite nice. We did stay in some government hotels, and I've never stayed in a hotel as disgusting, frankly, as what I saw in government hotels in Cuba.
Oh yeah, I can tell you. I was only in high school, but I remember the government hotels in Russia. Just downright creepy, just creepy. And dark. And my other sense of just kind of the psychological impact of a really government-controlled economy is not just that you have limited choices in beer and sneakers or all sorts of consumer goods you might want to buy, but there becomes a sense of dependency on the government. And I remember when Soviet Union, when finally the wall fell and they were going to become free, or they at least got rid of the communists, at least in name, there were reports about the idea that people, they didn't know how to be free. Yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about? That they didn't know how to function.
Yeah, there's no question about that sort of dependency that gets developed. And I mean, if I could switch to another country we went to, Venezuela, one of the things, I mean, and of course, they are not surviving. They are literally, people losing 20, 30, 40 pounds on average in a year. People are borderline starving in Venezuela. And the government has these, these ration cards that they can give you. And that's literally how you survive till tomorrow. And getting those cards, but getting that card means you've got to kowtow to the party line. You've got to show up to the rallies when you're told to show up. You've got to vote the way you're supposed to vote when it comes time to vote. Because if you don't, that ration card goes away, and you'll be getting garbage if you're lucky. And that's not, it's not just, it's dependency. People become dependent on those handouts, but it also creates this incredibly toxic power that the people who have those ration cards to give out, that they have over your life. And let's face it, we're not all saints. And some of these people, lots of these people are going to be using that power to enrich themselves and to really harm these people.
Yeah, I had a friend who, her mother was from Cuba and went back to Cuba with her mother in recent years to visit family. She wanted to wait till Fidel was gone, but he's gone. And anyway, she was talking about still in the neighborhood she grew up in, my friend, the American, visiting with these relatives over there, and she said in the house, because my friend works in politics, so they asked her something about how she was, and she started talking about politics, and they turned the television up really loudly, and they said there are still people, there's a word for it, I can't think of it, but neighbors whose job it is, who've committed to the communist government, to listen in and report. Well, I heard over in this house, they're talking about this. I mean, they're afraid of their neighbors. This is getting off economics, but...
No, but it's related, though, because people want to talk about the idea of democratic socialism, and we think that's a myth. You can have socialism, but you can't have democratic socialism, because when you empower people with that much power over your livelihoods, you are going to... And power corrupts. It's going to create an environment where the politicians who are in control of resources control your lives, too.
Yep, I do want to get to your attendance at the Democrat Socialist Conference in Chicago. I
fun.
Yeah, I actually did a story on that after that conference, just the craziness. But one more thing, we have several comments we could cover. I wanted to, if you could, share your adventures. You call your chapter 6 New Capitalism in Georgia. What was the story there? The country of Georgia.
Yeah, the country of Georgia. So I'm actually going to Georgia Friday again this coming week. I've been to Georgia 15 times. I'm kind of obsessed with Georgia.
Georgia phone.
Yeah. And one of the cool things that happened, so after the Soviet Union broke up in 91, Georgia became an independent nation. They had a few civil wars. It was frankly chaos. The Russians cut off the gas. It was a bad situation for about 10 years. They had a little sort of second revolution called the Rose Revolution in 2004.
The Rose Revolution.
A politician named Saakashvili would hand out roses to people on the streets because he was trying to emphasize that it was a peaceful revolution. And it was a peaceful revolution. But Saakashvili hired a crazy sort of free market libertarian named Kaha Bendikidze. And Kaha was a 400-pound, hulking, imposing person who swore, and he was just not a nice guy. Actually, I loved Kaha. Kaha died a few years ago. And he, in a very short period of time, transformed the Georgian economy into basically Milton Friedman land, a free market haven. Now, it's still got a major problem. It's a small country. It's isolated. Russia's a hostile neighbor. I was in the country when the Russian war occurred in 2008. But Georgia has been growing very rapidly, and they are now a free market country. And continuing with the alcohol metaphor, the alcohol is not really the focus of the book, but it's like a metaphor.
Yes, it is. No.
It's a running metaphor, is that Georgia's become a great wine country. They have a centuries-old, millennial-old winemaking tradition. Some of the oldest wines ever made on earth were Georgian wines, and they have great varieties that only exist there. And they're bringing back the old varieties. They're bringing back the old winemaking methods, and it's becoming a mecca for tourists now.
Okay, I love that, and that's on our list, on our long list of countries I'd like to
If
visit.
you go, I'll give you plenty of advice. I'm a big fan.
Okay, I'll email you. I do want to mention for our listeners, I want to do one more little story here about coverage of what's in the book related to the conference in Chicago, the Democrat Socialists of America conference, or whatever it's called. What's it called again?
Actually, ours
Socialist?
was just the Socialist Conference. It wasn't the Democratic Socialism. It was just socialism.
Just socialists. Okay, I do want to get to that. But I want to mention for our listeners, in this upcoming election, there are many young people who are lured into the idea of socialism because it's sold to them by the Bernie Sanders, by the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as a utopia, as a thing that is just to be wished for, and everything will be free, and everything will be fair, and no more mean rich people, and no more, you don't have to resent people for wealth because you all have everything you need. And it's scary because, you know, I'm of the vintage where we all used to always call the West, America, the free world. And we knew that was the opposite of socialism. We knew that was the opposite thing. And young people haven't been educated enough to understand this. So if you have relatives like this, I think you should give them this book for Christmas. Socialism Sucks, because it's fun to read. It's not a, economics pound you over the head, rules and examples. It is a actual rollicking trip through a variety of countries talking about really the impact of socialism, interspersed with really good data. So that's a great book. But I want to go back to socialism in America. I had two thoughts about that. And there was, I guess this is a different conference. There was a Democrat socialist had their thing too. In both cases, I was struck by the observation, and you mentioned here too, that people at that conference, they're there arguing for an economic system, or that the name of the thing is, but they have all sorts of bizarre, unrelated causes, like they are, abortion on demand and government-funded abortion. Do you have a thought about why people who would like socialism go off on all sorts of other leftist causes also?
Well, I think this is a tactic that socialists through the ages have used, is they find people who are disaffected about a particular issue, whether it's racism or the environment or the abortion rights or whatever the cause that you care about, and they say, hey, guess what? We're socialists over here. We care about that thing too. You should come over and join us. And it's sort of the gateway drug. So abortion was a great example, because I talked to lots of young people at the Socialism Conference in Chicago. This is about a year ago now. And I ran into a lot of them who got into socialism through abortion. And I'm like, socialism to me, again, means the state is controlling the means of production. Whether or not you can or can't kill your baby or whatever is not really a core
I don't think Marx talked about that.
Yeah, it's not a core concept of socialism. I mean, where you come down on that is wherever you come down on it, but it's not really related to socialism. And so it was confusing to me. But I think the socialists do a good job of reaching out to these, if you want to pejoratively call them social justice warriors, you reach out to these kids who care about something. And I even sometimes cared about the same things that they cared about. I had some sympathies with them in some cases. And they use that as a lure to get them into the fold. And then they try to bring them into the larger thing. It was a little bit of a slippery slope, kind of bait and switch kind of thing going on.
Bait and switch is the term I was thinking of. It sure is. Yeah, and they get sucked in thinking they're, because socialists said they're with me on X, and then they're into that mess. Well, this is really a great thing that you did, to write this book in a fun way, you and your co-author, fun way. And I guess one last question. So you're at SMU. I know that where you are at the Cox School, you guys are pretty much teaching free market things. But do you run across students who challenge you at SMU about, come on, can't you admit there's some good things about socialism? And if they challenge you, what's your most persuasive argument?
I don't personally, because I mostly teach graduate students, and MBA students are kind of self-selected out of that kind of thing. Although my colleagues who teach undergrads, they tell me they occasionally do we run some reading group programs at SMU, and we have undergrads in that. But my view and what we experience is that the kids, even when they come into us who disagree, they're pretty fair, and we're like, hey, would you read this? And we'll talk about it. And more or less, we end up having a good conversation. I can't say we convert every student away, but we haven't seen anything like what you see in the press about crazy left-wing students, screaming and yelling and protesting. We don't have any of that at SMU. In fact, we have a pretty good civil conversation, and that's the way it should be.
That's actually what college is supposed to be all about, to have intelligent exchange of ideas. Kind of lost that in some places. Well, Dr. Robert Lawson, Bob, I'm so glad you could come in. So glad you wrote this book. Again, for our listeners, there it is, Socialism Sucks. And thank you for coming in. Wouldn't it just a great thing, a great contribution to the American political conversation about economics?
It's a pleasure. Great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much
Thanks.
for coming in.
Care.
Take care. Okay, folks, I'm turning to two other quick stories today. And if you listen all the time, you know that I can get through two stories in 10 minutes. That's right. I want to talk briefly about the Coup update. We regularly talk about what's happened in Washington. The Democrats are just determined to bring forth this impeachment effort. And, you know, regardless of the fact that President Trump hasn't done anything impeachable. And I think actually, I have to tell you, I think more and more people in the country are realizing that. They're kind of waiting to hear from the Democrats. What exactly are you impeaching him on? I think there is just growing recognition. They don't have anything to be talking about. I mean, people hearing what Biden did in the Ukraine, they think somehow one conversation Trump had, and so the left is they're on fire trying to push this. So I was just going to hit a couple of quick updates. One is that Nancy Pelosi announced, I think this morning, that they are not going to have an impeachment vote. I think I told you yesterday that Nancy Pelosi had said they were going to go ahead and hold a vote of the whole House on impeachment with the idea that they were going to maybe get this vote done this week. And because she's pushing back against President Trump, whose lawyers sent this 8-page letter we went through a couple days ago. Lawyers said the White House is not cooperating with this impeachment inquiry until the Democrats follow the process and hold a vote for impeachment. The reason, and they don't want to do that. Pelosi doesn't want to do that. The reason I think it's good news that Pelosi said on Monday they were going to hold the vote, and then today or last night said, never mind, they're not. It's good news because what happened was the House was on recess and many Democrats went back to their home districts. I live in a district, if you can believe, I live in a district represented by a Democrat. I know the Democrats went back to their home districts and they asked their constituents, you know, kind of try to, you know, test the waters. What do you think? Should we go ahead and move toward impeachment? And I think that and then they had a caucus meeting after everyone's back in Washington. All these congressmen back and congresswomen met with Nancy Pelosi, and the outcome of that meeting was Pelosi saying, you know what, we're not going to have the vote. She knows that it will hurt her party. She still knows this impeachment effort will hurt her party. She heard back from Democrats who went home to their districts that the people in America are telling their members of Congress, do not do this. It is not justified. Knock it off. So she doesn't want to hold the vote. That was one good thing. Next thing was the Democrats have changed the rules again. You know, they changed. We talked about the 4 different rule changes they made already, made another rule change. So now what they're doing, this entire impeachment process is being done in secret. It's being done by the Democrats behind closed doors with witnesses coming, asking questions, being asked questions and giving testimony, not transparent, not open to the public, not available for President Trump's lawyers to be there, not available for President Trump's legal team to be participating, to ask questions, you know, to have an actual fair process. And so this is why Trump said he's not going to be involved. By the way, Giuliani also gave the same answer to the House, not playing this game with you, not going to cooperate until you have an actual impeachment vote. So the Democrats changed one more rule, which now is they're essentially treating these private meetings, these closed-door hearings with a witness and one person in question, treating them as depositions, and they're actually permitting, this is allowing one attorney at a time to ask questions, and it permits the selective leaking, which you know they cannot wait to do. So they really, despite all of the American public's attention on how wrong this is and how out of control the Democrats are, they're still thinking they're going to push forward on this impeachment effort. I think it's very dangerous. I think that if you've been squawking to your member of Congress or your senator, keep squawking, keep talking, keep calling, because they really are not. They're not going to stop. They have too much of the very far left driven to get Trump out at any cost, and the Democrats can't figure out how to hold their base together without at least appearing to push forward on impeachment. One last thought on this, which is there was a hearing, Adam Schiff, who is really the head henchman, or maybe you want to call Nancy Pelosi, you know, she's the persecutor in chief. But, you know, the team, the henchmen, Adam Schiff is one of the major ones. He chairs the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And they were the ones holding a closed door, you know, not transparent hearing. In fact, I think it was to question this Fiona Hill person. Anyway, before the thing started, Schiff, who is chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, forced a Republican who doesn't happen to be on that committee, but he's on a very relevant committee. He's on the House Judiciary Committee. Florida Congressman Gates forced him to leave the room. The Democrats are not just keeping the American public out of the discussion, out of the impeachment effort. They're keeping the Republicans elected to serve you in Washington, the Republicans who would have a vote on impeachment. The Democrats are even saying that guy, even he, cannot be part of this hearing. Folks, these people are on a mission. They do not care what the evidence is. As I said many times, I'm going to say it again. Impeachment effort of the Democrat Party has nothing whatsoever to do with President Trump's phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky on July 25th. Nothing to do with it at all. This is just the Democrats' latest effort, which has been ongoing since before President Trump even took the oath of office in January 2017. Endless effort to get him out. Every other effort has failed. Democrats are desperate. They know he'll probably win in 2020, and they don't want to face that, so they're just trying to drive him out. I just think they have no idea how enraged the voters in America are who supported President Trump. Harking back to the most idiotic statement in the entire Democrat debate last night by Cory Booker, who actually said the line. I played it for you earlier, if you happen to be listening. Played it for you earlier. He said that there needed to be have an impeachment process that was fair, that will help unite the American people. Truly delusional. Last topic for today, very quickly, I want to hit is LeBron James' dangerous ignorance. And I've just got to tell you, folks, LeBron James is a wonderful, famous, wonderful basketball player. I'm glad he's great at basketball. But you remember the story we talked about last week where the Houston Rockets general manager named Daryl Morey put a tweet out, and it was just a simple, small tweet. It had a symbol. I don't even know what the symbol was, but basically it said, you know, stand with the freedom fighters of Hong Kong or something like that. It was this guy, Daryl Morey, general manager of the Rockets, saying Americans should stand with the Hong Kong freedom fighters. So there you have, that one little tweet drove the left out of their minds. And so you had all this commentary and the NBA, different announcements. First they were saying, well, he's got a free speech right. Well, he shouldn't have said that. This is all against a backdrop of a tournament going on in China and not wanting to offend the Chinese. The Chinese were outraged. Their consulate in Houston told Morey he had to take it back. And he did kind of backpedal and say, well, I didn't know all the facts. Let me remind you what's happening in Hong Kong. It is over 1/4, over 25% of their citizens in the streets protesting. They do not want more communist control over Hong Kong. They did succeed in pushing back against the bill that kind of kicked it all off, which was a bill in Hong Kong that said basically if China decides they want to interrogate any person in Hong Kong for alleged wrongdoing, they were trying to get Hong Kong to pass a bill to say the moment China says we want to talk to somebody, we want to interrogate somebody, Hong Kong would cough them up, the citizen up, and send them back to China. And the people said no, because they recognize this is just a communist party, totalitarian communist party gimmick or ruse to crack down on people who speak up for freedom in Hong Kong. So back to our story, LeBron James, who is a good basketball player, actually tweeted out, and I just want to read you the impossibly idiotic statement. LeBron James, at times, this is LeBron James criticizing Daryl Morey, the Houston Rockets general manager. At times, there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others, when you only think about yourself. I don't want to get into a word or sentence feud with Daryl Morey, but I believe he wasn't educated on the situation at hand, and he spoke. So many people could have been harmed, not only financially, but physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just be careful what we tweet and what we say and what we do. Even though, yes, we do have freedom of speech, it can be a lot of negative that comes with it. Okay, my grandmother, the English teacher, would have had a field day with correcting those 2 paragraphs I just read to you. But far more importantly, this guy, a millionaire many times over, paid millions of dollars to play because he lives in a free market economy and a free country that lets him make millions of dollars because there are enough Americans who can afford to buy tickets to show up at his basketball games, and Americans who can afford to own teams that he plays on, Americans who can buy all the gear with his name on it and make him wealthy. This guy stood up for communist China over the Hong Kong freedom fighters. It is a pathetic statement about his comprehension of the virtues and blessings of freedom that have blessed his life in America, complete cluelessness about what living in China is like. This is a guy so driven to protect the NBA having games over there, and they want to make money and they want to have their products sold in China. Taking a stand, and this is, not to me, but to some young Americans, he's kind of an icon. He's kind of the guy, he's one of the most famous basketball players ever. And he puts out this kind of economic kindergarten level stupidness. And because he is completely economically illiterate, does not understand what the Hong Kongers are fighting for, which is freedom, which he's been blessed with his whole life, he feels virtuous. He's signaling how virtuous he is to stand up for China. Honestly, I wish some people who got so upset in the NBA about Daryl Morey's correct tweet about stand with the Hong Kongers would stand up for the people of Hong Kong and point out that LeBron James really ought to just play basketball because he has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. For him to throw in that phrase, when you think about yourself, when you think only about yourself, he is the one thinking only about himself. I urge you, if you haven't gone to our website, it's americacanwetalk.org. There's a great long story of some guy who went over and spent 3 days in Hong Kong, kind of planted in the middle of the protesters in Hong Kong, understanding their hearts and minds, understanding the freedom they're trying to stand up for. That is worthy of a good read. It's worthy of understanding what the people in Hong Kong are trying to stand for, and will help you see how impossibly, cluelessly idiotic LeBron James was in that statement. If he had an ounce of honesty and had a bit of economic advice, a little bit of learning, a little bit of knowledge of the world, he ought to issue an apology for standing up for China and against the freedom fighters of Hong Kong. And now, my friends, at the end of every show, I always try to tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. Today's stories, why they matter to you. The Democrat debate, Doozies, the core Democrat problem, life in Main Street in America is good, looking up. It is not filled with hatred of President Trump. And so Steyer's meltdown on income inequality doesn't ring true, sounds angry and hollow. Warren Sanders' Medicare for all as a cost for utopia isn't even believable. Booker wanting impeachment of Trump to be fair and bring Americans together, that does win the doozy of all doozies statements out of that debate last night, or presentation on CNN. The Democrats are sealing the deal, 4 more years for President Trump. The coup via impeachment ongoing. The update, Pelosi announces no House vote on impeachment this week. She's afraid, and that's what she's saying. That's because she knows there's no case, and Democrat incumbents in Trump districts are afraid to vote for impeachment. With no House vote, House demands for witnesses or documents have no legal teeth. They are just partisan agitation requests, which is why Pence, Pompeo, and Giuliani have refused to comply with their unjust demands. Refusals to comply with unjust demands are not, as the Democrats are going to argue, are not obstruction of justice. The issuance of unjust demands, closed-door testimony, anonymous and unconfronted whistleblowers, refusal to permit GOP participation, those, my friends, constitute obstruction of justice. And the coup via impeachment also, Americans are coming to realize there is not a shred of truth, honesty, or integrity to any aspect of the impeachment inquiry. It is a fraud, a scripted political deceit that has no substantive legal merit whatsoever. It is entirely and only the latest Democrat ruling class deep state effort to reverse the American people's choice in 2016 for president. The American people must rise up, make it known that they see through this charade and demand that it stop. And finally, LeBron's embarrassing and dangerous ignorance. LeBron James is truly one of the best basketball players in history. He's a cultural icon, and I'm happy for him. His basketball IQ is off the charts. His economic IQ, his knowledge and understanding of world history, of American exceptionalism, of the power and privilege of individual freedom, compared to the misery of collectivism and totalitarianism in all its forms, is embarrassingly lacking. He knows only what pop culture and the NBA's lockstep PC liberalism has taught him. James means well, but an American icon spouting ignorance is destructive. Maybe, I know what, maybe LeBron James should be invited to listen to America Can We Talk. And that, my friends, is my show for today. Thank you so much for listening to America Can We Talk. Like every day, just feel blessed to have the opportunity to talk to you every day about the great, extraordinary uniqueness of America, the gift of liberty, the best, most extraordinary country on earth. There's an experiment in human liberty, which is America. I defend it every day. I urge you to do it too, and to tune in every day to everything we talk about in the show, because I'm always speaking up for America, because America matters. Talk to you next time.
Can you hear us now?
America, Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can you hear